Hi, everyone. I'm Cammy Watkins. I'm one of the executive directors at Inclusive Communities, and along with Byndon with the Movement in Omaha for Racial Equity or More, and Ben Salazar with La Casa del Pueblo, are presenting this community forum today. First, I want to say thank you for coming. We did invite individuals from the Nebraska State Patrol, the Omaha Police Department, the County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigations. And so we appreciate any of the individuals that are here tonight from those law enforcement entities for taking the time to join us in this dialogue. And then also thank you to each of you from the community, whether it be a nonprofit, government representatives, or others, for being here and joining us in this dialogue. So first and foremost, I want to just lay out what is the purpose and why we chose to do this event today. So we have all partnered to host this community forum focusing on law enforcement and communities of color in light of the recent tragedy in Memphis, Tennessee, involving the officer-involved death of Tyre Nichols. These concerns have again been raised about the system of policing in our country and the circumstances that allow for certain things or enable certain systemic problems like that to arise. So the community forum really seeks to create an opportunity for an open and honest dialogue and discussions between the community and law enforcement officials from each of those entities that we invited to address the concerns around the issues of transparency, accountability, and community engagement when interacting with communities of color. Our focus today is on dialogue, not debate. While we do encourage respectful challenging and pushback, we aren't accepting or wanting this to be a space where we're attacking individuals. We want to center this conversation around systemic things that occur not only in other communities, but occur here in Omaha and across the state. We also are doing this because we care about this community. We all understand that we want a healthy and safe Omaha and state. And to do that, we have to be willing to have challenging conversations about things that may threaten that possibility for a quality of life for everyone, citizens and those in that law enforcement as well. So the process for today, we're going to kind of break this up into three parts. My two co-presenters here, Ajamal and Ben, will start, and they're going to share from their perspectives what are some of the issues, systemic issues that they have seen in their, 3-4 decades of activism in this community, in terms of how communities of color and law enforcement institutions have interacted from their perspectives, where the problems lie and what issues need to be addressed or resolved to create better relationships within the community and law enforcement. Then we're going to open it up for community members, that those of you that have joined this call, to just have a chance to share any comments or statements from your experiences, from your perspective, or ask questions for seeking clarity, or even challenge some of the perspectives shared by Ajamal and Ben. And then lastly, we want to give space for the law enforcement individuals that work in law enforcement to share their perspectives on the issues as they exist, to ask questions, to seek clarity, and to gain different perspectives. And then in the last 5 minutes, we're going to just wrap up and spend some time doing some next steps about what do we want to go from here? Where does this conversation take us? Because our goal is to make sure that we are moving the needle forward. We cannot continue. The urgency has always been there, but it's there even more so in the state of just talking about how do we change and not actually making change. So that is our goal in this conversation today. And so with that, I want to pass it on to Ben.
Thank you, Cammy. Ajamal, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share with you tonight my observations, my opinions with respect to policing and the communities of color primarily, although I don't think any of us want to say we are excluding any other community, because the truth is, when there's good policing of communities of color, that means generally there's good policing everywhere. And so I look at it from a worldwide perspective here in Omaha. This tragic event with Mr. Nichols is, of course, what triggered us to be here this evening. And I just want to note for the record that I was very disappointed, because other cities in the aftermath of that tragic event in Memphis immediately took affirmative action to talk openly and have dialogues with their respective communities, especially communities of color, about police tactics, about proper police methods. And here in Omaha, we virtually saw nothing. This is a city of almost 1 million people. More than 1/3 of the citizens and residents of Omaha are people of color. We've seen tragic events happen here in Omaha in recent years with police abuse and people dying at the hands of police. I'm especially privileged to be here tonight because it's a rare occasion when we're talking about civil rights, human rights, and I have the ability to share the stage with my brothers and sisters from the African American community. That to me is a very special, because it doesn't happen very often that we're able to cross Dodge Street and interact with each other on something as important as this. So I'm privileged to be here with my African American brothers and sisters, especially to talk about these issues. We don't have a whole lot of time assigned to each of us, so let me talk on 2 topics, even though there's a myriad of other topics with regard to policing and proper police procedures here in Omaha. I have a friend who was sexually assaulted a little over a month ago. She's a single mom with 2 little children, was having 2 people over to play cards with her in her apartment one night, one of whom was an acquaintance. They were having a few drinks, playing cards, everything was cool. She says the next thing she knew, she was laying on the couch with her pants and underwear had been removed. She went from playing cards in 1 second to lying on a couch and waking up. Clearly she had been drugged. And she heard the click, click sound of a camera. The monster that did this was taking pictures of her as she lay there, traumatized, trying to wake up, to realize what had happened to her, what had gone on, and he's still there. She immediately went upstairs to check on her children to make sure they were safe and secure. He, meanwhile, went out, left, but continued to call for the next 2 days. It took her 2 days to clear her mind, to find out exactly in her mind what happened to me that night. She called the police, I think it was on a Monday. The incident happened on a Friday. So 2 days after the incident, she called the police. They took a report. She showed me a copy of the report. They said a detective would be assigned to her case. That was over a month ago. No detective, as of yesterday, has still spoken to my friend about that sexual assault. She's called 4, 5, 6 times a week during that interim period, trying to find out when will that detective call me, visit me, talk to me about this incident. She had to take out a protective order just to feel secure in her own apartment, but she wasn't secure. She's been traumatized. She's been fearful for over a month that this man was still out there, still trying to call her, still texting her, calling it off as a joke, saying, I didn't intend to hurt you. So he essentially was saying, yeah, I did this thing. But here in this city, we're able to build huge buildings with millions of dollars, bridges from one place to another, from Council Bluffs to Omaha. Most people never use. I never use the bridge. Millions of dollars. Yet we can't assure the safety, the well-being of sex assault victims, both females and males, by doing something timely, by doing something better. And I could not help her. All I can do is console her, hold her hand, make my own calls and ask, why are you moving so slowly? This has to be addressed by the city of Omaha, by the police department and the leadership of the city. Because as I understand it, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of victims like my friend. That's one issue I want to briefly address. The other one is police oversight. Several years ago, in response to actions similar to what has happened in Memphis and here in Omaha, the mayor put together a police review board. I have a copy of that ordinance that she issued 3 or 4 years ago. Among the people represented on this police review board, it's called a Citizen Complaint Review Board. I see not a single Latino name. These are people that were selected and appointed by the mayor. But in addition to these 5 folks, also selected to be on this review board is one member of the Omaha Police Command Staff, one member of the Human Rights and Relations Department, and one member of the City Law Department. This is not what I would describe as a citizen review complaint board, because half of the members are either with OPD or with the city. And the others, none of them look or sound or have names like mine, a Spanish surname. So this is a farce. No one in my community ever calls me to file a complaint with OPD, because why? First of all, they have to go to the place that they fear the most, which is OPD headquarters, to file a complaint, or a precinct, or to the mayor's office, or as a last resort, to a library, which is completely impersonal. There's nobody there to say, here's the complaint, can I help you? Do you have any questions? Here's a form. There's a better way to do this. I'm going to briefly touch on a better way. There's no law that prohibits us as citizens to get together as a community and form a real citizen review board, a citizens oversight committee. We can do that without becoming entangled into the structure that the mayor has already established. We can do that separately. We can get authority from people that want to file a complaint to file it for them or with them. We can walk them through the process. We can answer questions that they may have, concerns they may have. We can do that as a community. It's called self-help. It's called grassroots. This is the way I grew up, with self-help and grassroots, because oftentimes nobody else cared. This time we care. This time we have to do something. This time we are motivated to do something. That's why, again, for me, it's a privilege to be here with Cammy, Ajamal, members of the Latino, African-American, and the white community. We have to do something different in addition to this review board, which is a review board to nowhere. It's a review board to nowhere. We can do better. We can establish our own. There's nothing that stops us from doing that. I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Ajamal.
I really appreciate being here today, and obviously the same accolades to Cammy and Ben of those coming this together. And again, I must throw a little light out at Ben, because he's the one who started us in this conversation. I really appreciate him crossing that Mason-Dixon line we call Die City, bringing the brown and black community together. But I also don't want to exclude Native Americans, Asians, and other good people of goodwill in this city. I'm going to do a little bit different, because I'm going to go through like a litany about 7 of different things I think we should be about. And having worked at Douglas County and inside the city hall, I was very disappointed in a lot of things that didn't happen related to race relations, disproportionality of youth of color and people getting into the system, and even just keeping track of demographics. So number one, I would say that the city has to do, in the police department, law enforcement, FBI, state patrol, you name them, county sheriffs, a better job of community relations with people of color, particularly when they come in contact with a lot of us in certain situations. And one of the things I want to give a shout out is Karen Abrams and I did training probably about 3 or 4 years ago with law enforcement. We must have about 20 people in the room. And then we found out that we brought our A game, but we found out they were looking for a C game, because they really didn't have the wherewithal to deal with some of the concepts that are basically talking about white supremacy, white fragility, you name it. And there was a cartoon showed, and some of the law enforcement people shared afterwards, they were offended by some of these basic issues that happen where you have somebody doing that training. The other thing that was unfortunate about that training, nothing happened after that training. It was probably the first time in the history, or the second time, that you've had local people who did training where they actually brought real issues in. The sad thing about it, afterwards, one of the command people came up to me. One said we shouldn't talk about negative issues dealing with race, which I found a joke. This was after the event. The second one came up to me, a person in the police department, have his name written down. He said, the reason why they treat Black people so bad is because they come in contact with Black criminals. Again, I can't believe he said that out of his mouth to my ears, and I reported to a number of people, but again, it fell on deaf ears. The other issue I think we need to talk about related to diversity training, we go back to when Zachary Bear Hills was murdered some years back, and they did some training with Native Americans. And as far as I know, there was no follow-up with that. But again, you have to have comprehensive training, the same way you train with learning how to use a firearm and so on. And we in Nebraska have been woefully inadequate in dealing with some of the current issues that are happening across the country and other places. I did have a friend in a high place. I'm not going to mention his name because he was in the sheriff department. He's not there anymore. But he shared with me that when they do the training online, some of the officers would turn the volume down and walk away and do other things. Again, out of his mouth into my ears as we were working on some of these issues. The other, I'm going to switch up here. The other thing that I really think is very important, we're really going back to what Ben just said. I was around when we had the public safety auditor, Christian Bond, and she passed away some years ago. But when she was a public safety auditor, she told me she said if I could write a book on what happens inside the local police department, it'd be a bestseller with some of the, she used the word, something like patent place that goes on. And I think that we need to have a great more sense of accountability, transparency, and allow these bad officers and people to be covered up and again to hide from some of these situations. So she shared with me some of her experiences when I was working with her, and nothing has changed. And I think Ben alluded to that in terms of we need some kind of oversight. And we also need oversight to deal with the data, because we know that the police department has not always reported their data to the FBI and to other sources. And I'm not going to blame the police department and other stuff. I think the same thing with FBI and state patrol and so on. There's really no one that I'm aware of in those systems who are credible messengers sharing data and engaging our community on a level that happens in other cities that are much more progressive. I used to attend the 360 meetings. Again, I'm not going to throw any shade on them, but I will tell you that I must have raised more questions than anybody in the meetings whenever I was there. And I can say to this fact, I don't know if I got an answer to some of those questions, even though it was promised they would get back to me. Again, some of the information that was shared was somewhat in a light-hearted way, but at the end of the day, I don't think there was any evaluations or any kind of long-term outcomes from attending those meetings for a year and a half. Now, I do know there was a survey made at the meetings, a POP survey, but as far as the written data, what the 360 or meetings in our community are occurring, I've not seen a report in my lifetime that talks really comprehensive about police community relations, law enforcement, the judges, all of the stuff that we talk about here. The other point I'm talking about is police brutality. Years ago, when I worked at Catholic Charities, there was a young man who was apparently speeding or something, and he got caught at 30th and Lake Street. A group of officers came out and beat the holy snot out of him, knocked him out and everything. And he came down to my office at St. Martin Deportation Center and asked me to write it up for him. He had all the bruises on him. They put him in jail. Again, I think they had to take him to the hospital. His mom was with him. But it was a traumatic experience just to experience seeing a young man who was beaten that bad. I know some other friends and relatives who've been beaten up by police officers over the years, and there's not been any repercussions to those officers. And I even have a close friend who told me about one time he got beat up. Again, no sense of redress because the system has that thin blue line that they protect themselves, but they create this trauma in our community and then expect us to pay tax to support their exorbitant and high salaries. And again, that occurs in many situations across the country, but as well as here. So we need to be about making sure that those bad cops or those people who are involved in terrible situations in our community are removed from the force. And I know sometimes the union and those individuals have fought against that, but if we're talking about true accountability and holding people accountable, we need to talk about the trauma that's inflicted upon these people and why many of these family members don't want to interact with police officers. When I was at the 360 meeting, I made a comment in front of everyone that I've only met good police officers in that meeting. And since I knew a few officers here and there, but they were some pretty nice folks in the room, but I don't know if they represent the total force because I've never really interacted with a lot of law enforcement officials in my career, in my life. And so I think we got to do a much better job at that. The other issue we really is probably the most important is having credible messengers. How many people are on the police department force that we are law enforcement or the FBI or the sheriff department that we can call up and talk to about some of the issues in our community? We need to make sure that we have people who are working in those systems who come from those communities and who can trust and who are not always carrying the water for the institution that sometimes are very much involved in some of these shaky deals that go on in our community. I did have a chance, I give credit to Ken Kanger. Okay, I had a chance to go and visit the police department. I was not in handcuffs, but I went to the administrative building and had a tour of the place. And he was really telling me how nice it was and yada, yada, yada. Now, remember, I've worked for almost 35 years and I've hosted probably at least 5 or 6 different community forums with police chief, but this was the first time that I walked inside the police building, maybe the second time, in the administrative structure to see what they're about. If they're serious about community and police engagement, then they need to make sure they reach out to various credible messengers, people, grassroots, grass tops, to talk to them about that. I serve on the Nebraska Children's Commission, and it's a statewide commission that deals with juvenile justice and child welfare issues. And a number of my colleagues, white colleagues, have talked to me about the inability to get law enforcement to share data and to, again, have some sense of credible way of talking to people about what happened in their field or in their work. And we need to do a better job at that. I also want to share related to that is I had a chance for the first time about 2 years ago to visit the FBI office. I didn't know we even had one in Omaha. And I walked in, I felt like I was in Fort Knox because they had so much security. But as I was sitting there, they did have a black guy walk by the office when I was talking to the agent in charge. He was the only one I saw. And I said, I'm surprised there's a black guy in this building. But if we're talking about the FBI who provides some oversight to law enforcement in this area, they got to do a better job. I remember the agent in charge, Eugene, we had a nice conversation. And he spent his whole time talking about he would like to be invited out into our community to talk to different groups. I reversed the paradigm. I said, we want to be invited to your building. We want to pay the taxes. We were prepared for that. So, folks, one of the things I think we have to do is begin to recalibrate that you see things different from the valley than what you see on the hill. And in law enforcement, they keep talking about how great our city is. But if you look at our systems, it's broken in many different areas. And it begins with dialogues, engagement, and challenging each other to make sure that we're not like some of these other cities in a sense. I don't think we're much better than a lot of other places because I have not seen the data, the empirical data, the reports, you name it. And some years ago, when there was a game report released, the city of Omaha and the folks who were involved in that had that thing squashed or put away or something. Again, we must look at all these kind of reports that are sometimes critical. And again, in order for us to grow as a community, we must begin to pull back the sheets, shine the flashlight, become more accountable, show some transparency. But at the end of the day, if this city is 33% people of color, 35%, how come it doesn't look that way in these command structures in the FBI, the state patrol, county sheriff, Omaha Police Department? I think the police department is much better. But these other law enforcements do not represent our community in terms of diversity, and we need to be able to have these conversations about that. Let me start by just saying that as someone who pays my taxes on time, and I don't like paying taxes, I really don't. But something is wrong when I have to pay taxes and I don't see any sense of reciprocity or accountability or return on my taxes that help improve the quality of life for many of the folks who are the underserved, the undercast, and those who are locked in these dungeons in our institutions we call prison. So if we're going to be about change and social justice in a sense of fairness, it means we got to make sure that the right folks are at the table and not the bobbleheads and personalities that are not dealing with the issues. Because the community did not come this way overnight. And again, we need to begin to challenge ourselves and have honest and frank conversations. There's an expression that says frank talk does not break friendship. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Ajmal Ben. So Ajmal Ben, do you want to go ahead and just facilitate the next part of the opening it up to our community members? Any comments, statements, questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, if people have any questions they want to direct either myself, Ajmal, or Cammy, or if they just want to make any remarks regarding maybe their own experiences with respect to law enforcement. One of the things that I've discovered, especially in the recent past, is that internally at OPD, there's a lot of issues going on internally among staff within the OPD administration. We saw the manifestation of some of these issues with the recent trial of Captain Gonzalez and how she prevailed. And if you studied that case, you saw that there were a whole host of issues that were not addressed properly. And really that led to her gaining that victory in the court. And then she also won her arbitration hearing, again, because the people that run the offices, that run the administration at OPD, fumbled the ball. They did things that were clearly unjust, wrong, and they were guided more by their own egos. There's narcissistic attitude that sometimes authority people take towards others. So then within the structure of OPD, these folks have to loosen up and not become dictators, even to their own staff. Equality begins there at home if they're going to give us in the community any sense of equal justice. It starts at home base. And I've seen that. And we've all seen it because it's been published in the news. And yet nobody said anything about it. There was no outrage. And I'm looking at that thinking, if any other person did these things to someone that worked for them in an office, in a private entity, in city government, or any government, those people would have been fired a long time ago. So there's problems not only with equal justice in the community, there's a problem of equality of justice within the department itself. And this is where things fall apart. But I'm going to leave it open for other comments or people that want to ask any questions.
I even push back and have concerns. You may have different points of view. This is what this is about. It's a dialogue, it's feedback. Other folks, feel free to say something. Open up your mic and go from there.
Adam, I saw you drop something in the chat. Did you want to share that with because on Facebook, people can't see what's on our chats in here.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you, Cammy. My name's Adam Fletcher Sassy, and I run NorthOmahaHistory.com. I came tonight because Jamal asked me to, and I'm flattered to be here and to listen to this conversation. It's a beautiful space. I just want to share with everybody an article that I wrote that's called A History of Police Brutality in Omaha. To write it, I looked through copies of the Omaha World Herald, the Omaha Bee, the Omaha Monitor, the Omaha Guide, and more than 5 other African-American newspapers dating back to 1860s, including old Omaha papers, to drudge up and really find these instances of police brutality in the city's history. I found about 35 different instances. And in this article that's right here that I dropped the link in the chat to, you can just Google A History of Police Brutality in Omaha, and it should come up first. But basically, here are 35 specific stories. One of them, Jamal shared with me directly and caused me to add it to the article. It was spectacular, but I found the evidence for it. All this is evidence driven. This isn't conjecture. It's not possibilities. It's not stories that somebody might have whispered. These are the out loud stories. I didn't pick them necessarily. They are just what came. There are so many more stories, and these are the ones that don't make the media. They don't come to the papers, but I thought I could start with this little piece that summarizes these different circumstances. The other thing that I put into the article are specific pieces of responses by the police department, by the Omaha Police Department, to these circumstances, different things that they have said that they might do, that they might see, that they might say, including the Citizen Complaint Committee and the different mechanisms like that have been thrown out. However, the media shows they don't exist and they haven't done the things that they've said they'd do, going all the way back, because the first demands for police reform in Omaha led by people of color go back to the 1920s. And it was spoken of clearly in the 1920s and 1910s by African-American leaders in North Omaha in the media when they talked about police brutality then. So we're not talking about a recent phenomenon. We're not even talking about 50 years of problems, even though we can all point a lot of fingers in a lot of directions in these last 50 years. We're talking about more than a century of a pattern of abusive behavior by the Omaha Police Department, not driven by conjecture, but actually shown by research and evidence. All of which is we can back up with more evidence. So this is just a little bit of the history, but I thought I'd drop it into the chat and invite you all to take a look if you get a chance.
One of the things I noticed from Adam's report is that of all the police who were involved in these killings or shootings, or you name it, none of them spent one day in jail in Omaha. In other words, in other cities, they can get arrested in Minnesota, or they can be fined, or you name it. But we tend to have much of a cover-up in Nebraska. And again, I was around when Vivian Strong was killed, murdered, shot in the back of the head, and that officer did not go inside the jail building. They basically let him get off free and leave town. And again, it's happened on more than one occasion. So again, those incidents, they may seem minor to some folks, but they cause trauma in communities because they walk around a sense of fear and afraid to interact with police officers because they see them getting away with murder in our community and have in the past.
Can I,
We-
Other feedback, other reactions.
let me add one thing to that part of the conversation is this. You know, we citizens, residents of not just Omaha, but cities throughout the country, we have this unique ability to broach this subject matter, which is very important to all of us, because these folks work for us. These are public entities. And like Ajamal mentioned, they survive on the basis of taxes that everyone pays into the system. So they are an integral part of the system with this unique authority, this power of authority with a badge and a gun that they carry. All right. So, but we have the ability as citizens to address these issues because these are public service entities. It's not a private company, and private company can get away with a whole lot of stuff, and they probably do with respect to racism, bigotry, and those kinds of issues. But when it comes to public entities, our servants, people that get paid by our taxes, we have the responsibility and the right to make these inquiries and ask, why are you not dialoguing with us, the people, the citizens? And why are you not following certain guidelines of behavior? And what are those guidelines of behavior? And what does your training consist of? And what do you know about, if you're white, what do you know about Black people? What do you know about Latino people? Do you really know our culture or us as people? Do you really accept us on an equal plane as human beings? We are not just those people. We are not just those people. We are part of this country. We have been a part of this country for centuries. Some of us are indigenous to this country. We're natives to this country. But we have this right as citizens to say and demand answers. And that's why we're here tonight. And I noticed, Cammy, you have questions coming on your chat line if you want to get into those.
I want to go ahead and uplift a couple of these. So comment, well, I very much organizing, proposing, and insisting on a genuine citizens police oversight group. If we make such a proposal, how about we also propose a new mayor, a new city council, etc. Then a couple questions that came through from Facebook asking, my question is, how can we dialogue with the police when in many cases they are unwilling to accept the simple fact that they are employees of taxpayers in Omaha? And y'all kind of addressed that. The next statement, I'm going to just do these two and then kind of go through. Why is relationship between OPD and Empowerment Network not addressing these issues? Plus, no one can explain how a weekly meeting between OPD and community groups for a decade has not produced anything. OPD should be embarrassed co-signing this. And then the next comment is, how can you hold people, oh, this is a question. How can you hold people accountable if you don't call those people out who are the problem?
Well, I think what we're doing that tonight in a kind of respectful and a polite way. I mean, believe me, some of us could really go off on a loop in our private conversations, but we're doing this with respect, okay? Because there are good cops, all right? And some of them are our brothers and our sisters, and some of them are friends of mine. So good cops are not the problem. However, good cops that don't speak out when they see injustices, and this happens within any kind of structure, whether it's a private or public entity, is people get intimidated. Why? Because they fear for their jobs, right? And everybody has something to protect, families, children. I've heard the stories before. Well, why didn't you say something? You saw something was wrong. Well, sometimes it doesn't come out until there's a court case. Yeah, well, I knew about it, but we just kind of turned our into another direction and ignored it. It wasn't us who was being targeted. It was him that was being targeted. I want to stay out of that fight. So like American society in general, and I take the classic case of Vietnam. I'm a Vietnam veteran myself. Too many people turn the other way of an illegal and murderous war that was completely unnecessary. Why? because the good people didn't speak out, didn't say anything, didn't look at the facts, didn't examine the reality of what was going on around them. We're here to say this is preventive care to OPD, law enforcement. We're here because we want you to be a part of us as we are a part of you. This is preventive care that we're undertaking tonight. So we have to have this dialogue with you. You have to open up the books.
There's a couple of folks with questions coming
Find a
in
better
now.
way. There are better ways and more effective ways to do good policing.
Then there's a couple of folks got some questions. I saw the hand up over there.
Hi, yes. So I'm gonna ask kind of a maybe more uncomfortable question. And I kind of just want to say this ahead of the question. This is kind of about unions. My dad was a representative of his local chairman for probably 15, 30 years, retired with UP. I've marched in the Labor Day parade 3 different times. I noticed at the last Labor Day parade that OPD had a large presence. So that kind of leads me to think that they are a union-based police force. And we heard, I think it was last year, or the year before, that NYPD had kind of a lot of discovered corruption within their police force, or their union for their police force. So just kind of with some of what we're talking about and what you're saying as far as like the barriers and the the items that we're mentioning, has unions ever become
I was going to respond. One of my colleagues, and I think somebody may speak about it a little bit later, but the Omaha Police Department doesn't technically, their union, call themselves a union. They're kind of a different kind of an order, but I do know that they're at the table and they do a lot of backroom bargaining, and they sometimes have privy information, and they come out and run this stuff they shouldn't be running with as a union, like they're independent. Again, the guy who's the head of it is kind of a character of a source. And again, they've said some things that are very disrespectful about people in the community, even though they're being paid by that. So I think there's a whole issue related to how the union and the police department, not the union, but their fraternal, whatever they order, police operate with the command structure. And we need to talk about that from time to time, because again, at one time I heard the chief police said they're representative of themselves and they don't represent us. But again, when you hear them talk, they oftentimes speak out of the same voice, or they use the same tongues when they cover for each other and help each other out. The other thing that we didn't talk about, and I don't want to let the FBI and the state patrol, and of course the county sheriff's office. The county sheriff office has a really bad problem with diversity and race. Again, I understand in the past they had to pick the top 3 candidates, and they tend to pick the buddy system. As we know, in the Omaha Police Department, there was some corruption years ago. Fire department, where they were giving out exams to each other. And again, that has an impact on who gets jobs in these systems. So again, if the county sheriff or the FBI are not having people who come from our community play a role, we can't just constantly focus on Omaha Police Department, because we got some other bad actors in this whole conversation that we need to bring to the table. When was the last time you saw somebody from the FBI talking to our community or engaging us, even though if the police department does something wrong, or some of these entities, they go and investigate it? So we should not just exclusively focus on OPPD, Omaha Police Department rather, because again, there's some other entities that have some nefarious or some strange behaviors that they're involved in. And again, we have no sense of a reach into those systems. But I'm gonna stop there, because I think there's some other people out there who want to make comments and push back, because I don't want me and Ben to dominate the show. We call this community dialogue.
So one other question in here, Michael Watts is asking, where is ACLU, NAACP, Urban League on these issues and incidents? I don't know if anybody from any of those institutions are on this call this evening, but if there are, I open the space for you to talk about it.
Let me say one thing about what I do in my community. I don't have a title. I have a nonprofit that I work under and I contract with, and I do. I act as a watchdog for my community. I'm a Chicano activist for more than 50 years. So my main mission in life is to take care of my community, watch out for my community. When bad acts, discrimination, bigotry is aimed at members of my community, then I come out of my office and I make complaints, I file complaints, I speak out. That's what I do as an activist. Right. But you know, the thing that is very bothersome to me is that we get stereotyped. You know, there is a lot of distrust between the races. Let's face it, this has not been eliminated. Racism has not been eliminated. I grew up with a neighbor called Jim Crow. Jim Crow lives here in Omaha, Nebraska. He lives among us. There's a lot of hatred still out there against certain groups. And when people talk about South Omaha, for example, and I'll concentrate on my community, oftentimes we're seen as just workers. You know, we're essential workers. During the pandemic, who were we? We were the essential workers. Why? Well, because we cut up the meat. You know, we deliver the food, we cook the food. That's the stereotype. The other stereotype is, well, they're a tourist attraction. Why don't we fix up that community so we can go eat a taco for Cinco de Mayo? So what I'm saying is that there's sometimes attitude among too many folks that we're less than equal. Why? Because we don't have the intellectual capacity. See, and that to me is the most offensive stereotype of all, is that we're attacked because people think that we're not intellectually capable of elevating ourselves, which is complete nonsense. Because I've seen the history of our people. I've seen the history of African people. I know the great cities that they've built on each of these great continents. And it's a farce to think that we don't have the intellectual capacity. We're here because of that great intellect of our people, of our ancestors. We're here, we're thriving or trying to thrive in a country that oftentimes doesn't even want us here.
Ben, one of the, I see, is Keith Station going to say something? I see he has comment by his name. Is this, Keith, are you going to say something, Keith Station?
Yes, sir. If now's a good time.
Oh, yes. I see that you in the circle. So yeah, I haven't heard from you in a while. Look, it was nice seeing you. Looking pretty good there.
I appreciate that. Well, hi, everyone. I'm going to hope that my 4-year-old doesn't come down and foil my comments. She may show up any moment. I'll try to be brief. First, I just want to say peace, everybody, and thank you for doing this. I'm a big fan of Cammy's and a big fan of inclusive communities. Much respect to you, Mr. Salazar, and to you, Mr. Byndon, as well. I appreciate this forum and this place for discussion. So if I may, I want to wear a couple hats in my comments. So I am currently an appointed city official, but I'm also a member of this community and am of this community. And so as I hear the discussion and I hear the foundation laid, I have a lot of thoughts and a couple of things. So what I won't do is I don't intend to refute the things that have been said. I want to just add to the discussion. So my role is, and for those who may not know, I am the city's chief diversity officer. My title is deputy chief of staff for diversity, equity, inclusion, and I'm in the mayor's office. I want to endorse the Omaha 360 collaborative because so much collaboration, rich dialogue, data, interaction and partnership with law enforcement and the community happens there, and it's done in a thoughtful way. Is it perfect? No. Is it the end all be all and the solution to some of the disparities that still exist and have persisted? It's not. But what it is an excellent forum for dialogue to take place, for people to connect, for progress to be made, for people to be able to talk directly to law enforcement in a public way. And there have been some outcomes that have been positive that have come from that. In fact, the last Saturday was the State of North Omaha Part 2 discussion. And this is not an Empowerment Network commercial again, but it was a really rich dialogue with the Empowerment Network, a report out from law enforcement, healthcare, transit, economic development, the ARPA, LB 1024, and certainly justice and violence prevention and intervention strategies were discussed. And that, what preceded that was a couple of weeks ago, the State of North Omaha Part 1, where there was a report out, which was really a talk at. And this past Saturday was a chance for community members to engage and take the discussion further. Many of you may know there are lots of communities that are looking to emulate what the Omaha 360 Collaborative has done with just having that police community forum. And again, it's not perfect. It isn't the answer, but what the persistent rally call has been is everybody show up and do your part. And that's how we intervene into the things that are happening now. And that's how we prevent and go upstream to make sure that in 3, 5, 10 years, this work doesn't look the same as it looks now. I have the privilege of serving as the city liaison for the Mayor's Native American Advisory Board. That board was created after the killing of Zachary Bear Hills. We also have the Human Rights and Relations Board, and as you spoke earlier, the Citizen Complaint Review Board is now out of that. And I wish there was someone from Human Rights and Relations Department present to be able to expand on that. I also wanted to point out that, the reason why I really appreciate this conversation is because if there weren't people who didn't speak truth to the powers that be, that didn't, disrupt and dismantle systems as they existed, then perhaps I wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be able to vote, or there are lots of ways that there are lots of things that I enjoy that my ancestors fought for, and Mr. Salazar, your ancestors fought for, so that we can be having this discussion today. But that does not leave us in a place where the city should be without criticism, and that law enforcement should be without criticism, and that laws and policy as they exist today should not be without criticism, with direct input from citizens. So what I try to do and have seen value in doing is walking and standing in solidarity for these conversations and these causes. Also working to make sure that local government, I'm speaking for the city, I can't speak for the county or the state or anything, but making sure that city government is more accessible to people, to make sure those of us who are privy to how it works and how to talk to people and how to get in and how to affect change, to make sure that those who don't know how have an invitation and know where the front door is to be able to have input. So what I hear is an opportunity for us to just get deeper in making the data and access and input more accessible, so that we can get to it, so that we aren't talking past each other, and so that we aren't getting stuck in politics, and that we are still speaking truth to power and involving the least of us in these discussions, because sometimes that gets left out. The folks, one thing, and I'll say this last thing, I'll be quiet. One of the things that I noticed at the state of North Omaha, led by Empowerment Network last week, was that there are a whole bunch of folks that weren't present that need to be there hearing the discussion. And I suppose folks that weren't joining virtually and online that need to hear it. So a lot of the people that needed to hear it weren't there. So what do we do to make sure that the information is out there, accessible, because there's some rich data and information and trends and things that have been substantiated that are indisputable, that inform where we go from here, and how we can make sure that this work doesn't look the same in 10 years, 5 years, or even 3 years from now. If it looks the same, if this discussion is the same, if there's another Memphis and even ever again, then we are behind tremendously. I would also just point to one thing that Willie Barney had mentioned, is that next month's monthly meeting will be a Justice Summit focused on sort of taking the initiatives that stem from 360 and taking it to the next level. Again, talking with OPD, talking with the Sheriff's Department and the other law enforcement entities that were invited today. So I would just invite everyone to, that's the next opportunity for us to get into how we can understand better and have input to what the justice system is doing, and how it exists today, and how we all can do our part to ensure that Memphis, Tennessee doesn't happen to ever again, and especially in Omaha. I'll stop there. Thanks for doing this, Cammy, and thanks for the insight and history.
Folks, there are 24 people on in this session. Are there other folks who want to say something? I know Ben and I have talked a great deal, but part of this session is to get people to share their concerns and not be bystanders and sit there. So other reactions from other people to what Keith just said, anyone, but we want to get more community input on this conversation for the record. Other people.
I want to uplift a comment from Doug, and Doug, if you want to share, please go ahead, or I can just go ahead and read the comment.
I have a question if we're open to one.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
So as a woman and gay, I think that there's also concerns for discrimination as far as Omaha goes and those concerns. But I would ask you all, given the new open legislation session right now, what laws are you looking at right now that you are keeping an eye on for the community that I think we need to track as far as discrimination, as far as racial, LBG concerns, and more importantly, women concerns as well. So I was just wondering what you guys thought from three different kind of perspectives, woman, Black and Hispanic, that you thought what laws we should be looking for. I know what I'm going to look for as far as one of my concerns are, but I was wondering what you guys thought.
Can I address that briefly? First of all, I'm aware that Senator McKinney is introducing this oversight bill that I think someone told me he's introduced before, but it's got a lot of stuff in it that I don't think it's going to pass muster. So I appreciate his efforts, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I completely believe in abortion rights, and I know that that's a hot topic nationally. I believe in a woman's right to choose, absolutely. And why we men are even involved in that discussion is beyond me, because I don't believe that we men should be involved in the discussion of a woman's rights to her own body. With regard to LBJQ, I know that there's another legislation pending or being spoken about, controversial because it has to do with education and these kinds of things. I, in my immediate and extended family, have a number of young women, nieces, cousins who are lesbians. I have young men who are nephews who are gay. So and they're all wonderful people, and they're all family. They still belong to my family, and they're embedded in my family. So I don't really care about what they believe in terms of their own sexuality, because they're good human beings. And that's the way that I measure other people is, are you a good human being? Are you a good soul? Do you share with others? Do you care for other human beings? If you don't, then why are you here on earth for? Because to me, that's the goal of being here on this planet. We're only here a short time. So why do you want to be hostile, mean, or controlling or discriminatory? Because to me, that's bad for your soul. That's bad for your psyche to be that way. So I'm completely contrarian to any of those kinds of bad acts, bad legislation. But that's just me personally. And by the way, I read some of your material, Colleen, and I appreciate your efforts very much.
Then to kind of jump onto those there. I think a couple things come to mind. The legislation that we have right now, one, we are still in the state of Nebraska trying to pass legislation to make sure that a person that identifies as gay or trans cannot be fired from their job. We are still fighting to get that legislation passed in Nebraska. It's been introduced for at least the last 3 or 4 years that I can remember, and we still have not gotten that passed. So when we talk about how do we create humanity and humanize individuals, that's something for sure that I think we need to address. And then the new legislation this year that's banning performances of drag queens or drag shows for people under 19 years of age or 14 years of age. And this is targeted directly at individuals who do drag queen story hour, which families get the choice to bring their children to, and it's exposure to different people that we're criminalizing just behavior of humans. And that's going to go back to, I think, for me, the comment that Doug made, which is the problem is a lot of aggressive, racist, misogynistic cops, but more the problem is US policing and who it serves and protects coast to coast from the start. And from my perspective, that is the root of the problem. Each of these situations, when we create laws, when we create ways in which we're dehumanizing, and I think you talked about this, Ben, about how we take away the validity and the ability to exist in this planet, when we call Latinos and Native Americans and African Americans slurs and names and immigrants, dehumanizing them, and then that takes away our equal justice under the law. And in certain ways, our systems of law enforcement have perpetuated that dehumanization. They were the ones responsible for maintaining the laws. Being gay was illegal. A police officer, and it was mandated by our Supreme Court. Excuse me, I just watched a documentary about the 14th Amendment, so that's what's fresh on my mind. When we talk about equal justice and due process, there's so many of these marginalized communities that aren't allowed that equal rights under the law as the 14th Amendment allows us. And in many ways, and as Adam kind of pointed out, for the over 100 years, even in this community, it's because of that dehumanization of certain populations that we see this system of law enforcement continues year and decade and century after another to continue to perpetuate. And I think that's part of the bigger conversation that we have to be having of what are the cultures, what are the circumstances, what are the practices? Because we're not going to train our way out of white supremacist thought processes. Focusing on individual actions of individual officers and leaders or agents and agencies is not going to change the problem, because the system itself, the entire programming, is biased in certain ways, and not to any one individual, it's for multiple identities. And so that's what we need to have bigger conversations, look at the patterns that are happening. And that's why it was important for us when we started this conversation that we weren't just talking about the police department, that we were also talking about all of the other institutions, because they're all feeding from that same. If anyone attended those Racial Equity Institute trainings, where we talk about the groundwater effect, that if you look at one individual, if you saw a fish and the fish is turned up dead, you think something's wrong with that fish. And then you come back the next day and there's 10 dead fish in the lake. You realize something might be wrong with the lake. And then you realize down the street, 2 miles down the way, there's 10 fish dead in that lake too. It's because the groundwater is tainted. And that's what the types of situations I think we're looking at.
Let me add this comment about women in general, Cammy. There have been 2 high-profile cases in Lincoln within the last 2 or 3 years, filed by Lincoln police officers, females, alleging discrimination within the department. Kathy Gonzalez's case here was largely sexual discrimination within this department from friends who are cops. I've heard them labeled as Mexican mafia, wetbacks. Right? These are Latino cops within the department being called and slurred with these derogatory names in this department here. This comes from Latino cops that I know telling me this. It doesn't just outrage me, but it's so sad, so disappointing to see.
But let me ask you straight up, again, I hear this story, but going back to what Keith said, how does that happen in the city of Omaha when you have police officers doing that? Isn't there some kind of checks and balance? In other words, if you do certain things that are egregious or negative, can they just be fired? Or is there some kind of safety net that they can't get challenged with? Because what you're describing, you would think it wouldn't exist in this day and age, but it does. And so my point back to Keith or other officials who work in these administrative positions, is there kind of redress to get rid of these bad apples or people who got this white supremacy mentality? And Ben, I heard what you said clearly, but my point is, how do we address that in a bigger picture? Keith, that maybe you may know the answer since you got your hands close to the mayor's office somewhere in there.
Well, sometimes it takes a class action lawsuit to address that. And somebody mentioned what's going on with ACLU, Urban League, some of these other civil rights organizations that were founded years ago. I stay in regular contact with the ACLU. I have colleagues at the ACLU because I know that sometimes the only recourse or redress that you're going to have is in the court system. But it takes a little bit of courage, Jamal, as you know, and sometimes courage is muted by the fact that you may lose your job if you speak out.
But Bill, what I'm saying is keep in a position that the mayor can stop people doing that since they're on the city payroll. Can you respond?
Yeah, I would say that when there are situations that the official protocol kicks in to reprimand or discipline law enforcement if there is something that can be proven that a law enforcement officer did something that is, outside of the decorum of and policy for being an officer of the law. There are situations where the chief of police can remove that officer immediately. And there are situations where they do have some legal recourse, and sometimes they don't. One thing I will say to the larger question, Ajamal, you asked about, what can be done about that. I think that leaders in law enforcement and elected officials in the government understand that what is best for law enforcement is to make sure that the community is safe, but also law enforcement officers are safe. And so when you have racism and you have that bias and you have officers who are derelict of their responsibility to protect and serve, that makes the environment not safe for all law enforcement. I think somebody alluded to it earlier, the only person that hates a bad cop worse than all of us is a good cop, right? Because if you are irresponsible, if you are using those slurs, Ben, that you mentioned earlier, if you are perpetuating a culture within the law enforcement department of the hate and racism and bias and just illegal activity, that makes it unsafe for all officers. That sometimes spurs violence against law enforcement officers, and the larger system should have an interest in removing that, because that's how we keep all law enforcement officers safe, and fire and rescue, for that matter, safe as well.
Well, Keith, here's my question: has that ever happened in Omaha?
Has whatever happened?
In other words, getting rid of those officers who use those racial slurs that Ben alluded to. Has that happened on your watch, or do you know of any incidents that it happened once?
Well,
I'm
I
not sure.
I also want to open, just like, this is our portion also, so not that question, just not only to Keith. If there are any law enforcement individuals that are on this call, please also feel free to jump in. This is that portion of our conversation, but go ahead, Keith.
I was just going to say, I'm not sure if solely for that reason. One of the things that we have is the body cam that allows the audio and the visual from encounters with the public. And I know that our chief, that Chief Todd Schmatter has said and has asked for officers to be mindful of the energy and the language that's used when they come into contact with the public, because he's asked the question, what good are we if we leave people feeling negatively about an interaction with law enforcement? That doesn't keep us safer. That doesn't keep the community, that doesn't make the community better.
Keith, I asked a question. Was there one example you could point to? Has that happened during your watch, or that you're aware of in the city?
That an individual has been fired specifically just because of racial epithets or words? I'm not sure. I can't say that it has not happened. I don't know.
Okay, no, then that ends our conversation. I'll stop there. But I just want to know if it ever happened since you've been in the position. But there's a question up on the chat there. Somebody got some comments about shot spotters. Is that something you want to talk about?
That's not something I can comment on, but and that's one of those things that is a part of, if there was somebody from the command staff from Omaha Public or Police Department, they would speak to the fact that that's a level of police.
I can speak on that.
Go ahead.
I can speak on.
Go ahead.
What do you want to know? What do you want to know about shot spotter?
Karen, can you articulate that succinctly? Because I know it's kind of long-winded what you wrote. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, Colleen, what I was saying was that I really think that we need to have more, as part of the increased transparency around law enforcement in general in our region, county, and city. I want to have a better understanding about things like ShotSpotter, in addition to how much we're spending on it per square mile, and where in North Omaha the electronic detectors are located. I know they don't want to say, at least I would like the boundary lines of that. And I would like, since there's been a lot of criticism about ShotSpotter nationally, I would like to have a better discussion in our community about how the false negatives that are that have been shown to be a problem with ShotSpotter. In other words, police being going out to areas where there are supposedly shots, but there really aren't, because it's not a false negative, a false positive. Over policed communities, because ShotSpotter is in North Omaha, are getting additional police reactivity, and stop and frisks would be on the increase, and then potentially, other misconduct. And I think we need to really have a better understanding of these systems as people in the community. That's what I was talking about.
Well, I don't know how much you want me to go into it tonight, but I can tell you that one, ShotSpotter is good, but ShotSpotter is bad. So I'm not going to give up tactics because we've solved crimes with ShotSpotter, but I would also say that you can. I'm gonna liken it to the new crisis with adjusting our radar and the UFOs that we're having. If you tune in, sometimes you can get a backfire in a car will register with ShotSpotter. And so sometimes when you're getting those false datas, when you talk about that, it can be ambient noise that is collected. So, but we've also know that we are able to respond quicker than when we can determine that there are shots in the area. It's kind of like SROs. There's good and bad. You want kids to be safe, but you also don't want cops going into the classroom to settle a dispute. So it's like those are where the transparency comes in. But I will say this as well, that the Kerry Newman, the deputy chief of Omaha Police Department, went on to be an executive, maybe even the president of ShotSpotter. So they're in the business of protecting the Omaha Police Department's data. So I think that ShotSpotter can be good if it's transparent. It can be bad if they hide shit. Sorry, my bad. Sorry, didn't mean to cuss. That's my thoughts. So you wanted my input? There you go. You got your police input.
Good, thank you. Other reactions, other feedback. We got about what, 15 minutes, a little bit more than 15, 17 minutes or something up here?
Yep.
Yeah, I'd like
Oh,
to
go
step
ahead, Doug.
forward, if I could. Yeah, thank you very much. First, my respect and my gratitude to the work of Ben Salazar and Cammy Watkins and Aljamal Byndon, who I've been so appreciative of, especially Ben and Aljamal, who I've known for off and on for 40 years. I've been here in town for 40 years when I came to teach at UNO, and I just have such a regard for what they've done. I'd love to have lunch with Mr. Station. I don't agree with some of what he said, and we have to have lunch or coffee, and I'll see if I can follow up with that. But I do like Ben's idea, and I think I'd hate to lose that, is that we put forward a different police oversight committee. I mean, this oversight thing, what is it, 30 years old when they actually got finally a police auditor, and that person lasted maybe 12 minutes?
Yeah.
And they got rid of them. It's such a farce. So in a sense, what I'd like to see us do is put up, an array of 5 people, 6 people. And I don't expect them to accept that. I like militant theater, militant performance. Let's put forward at a press conference 5 people who've got all kinds of credibility, and then we'll wait for a response. When they don't respond, we replace one of them and say, we're trying to find which one of these people they didn't like, because clearly this is a competent group of people, and we're trying to make it more competent and turn what they've done with police oversight into a comedy. Yeah. And have really good people there, really capable people who can articulate the arguments. And then if that doesn't work after a couple of press conferences, then we put a whole brand new group of people and say, what'll it take to get really competent people on this committee? Go public, make it fun, have a good time, but also be serious. So I don't want to lose track of your idea, Ben. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, no, there'll be some follow-up on that, I promise, because there has to be a structure to it. There have to be component pieces in both North and South Omaha to start with. It has to be organized. It can probably be done under a nonprofit name, and it will be a shadow running a partner with the official mayor's oversight committee, which is, like you say, it's farcical, it's ineffective, and nobody trusts it. Nobody trusts that system.
Terrific.
So as citizens, we have the right to do it and to establish one that will probably be even more effective than what's established by government right now.
Yeah, I really agree with that, Ben, and I can't be on it, but I really appreciate it. If I can help in any way, let me know.
Thank you.
But by the way, Shireen has something up there. Shireen, did you want to speak to that, or did you want somebody to read it? Shireen? There's a question up there in the chat.
I can go ahead and read it for you, Shereen. The bad apple, quote unquote, view of the systemic problems of violence within police departments suggested by Keith Station serves to sustain the problem. Is that the city of Omaha's primary view at this time? What other views might they be willing to adopt that would be more conducive to systemic change? And then after it, Keith, if you'd like to respond to that, then we'll jump to Paula, because I saw that you came unmuted.
Sure. Well, I first I want to say, Mr. Patterson, I'll be happy to chat anytime. And to the last comment, if I left you with the impression that the bad apple just needing to be rooted out is the solution, then maybe I've misspoken. I don't mean to convey that. And also I want to acknowledge that if it hopefully doesn't appear that I'm just carrying the water and trying to say nothing to see here. I recognize that there is room for improvement. I recognize that criticism is necessary to make us better. And I also am mindful of the chief mentioned a couple of weeks ago. This was, I think, 3 Mondays ago. He mentioned that at the moment we were 100 officers down from the entire workforce that we have budgeted for and have scaled to estimate the need for law enforcement in the city. We're 100 officers down, and some of that is because the process to scrutinize qualified law enforcement officers is pretty strenuous. Some of it is just the profession is suffering. Nationally, it's not unique to Omaha. There's a lot of it's hard to find people that want to be police officers these days. The size of the applicant pool that we once had used to be massive, and now it's maybe a fifth of that, and that whittles down to people who are psychologically and who are prepared to be officers in a responsible way. It's a much smaller amount of people, and to the credit to the law enforcement, they don't just push folks through just so we can have officers out there. So I think that to get to systems change, I think it takes dialogue like this. It takes hard questions. It takes some sunshine. It takes having a chief of police like we have, who's open to making sure people understand how to access law enforcement. I think that there isn't a magic wand that we wave to make it better. I think that it takes that the building on the foundation of police community relations that we have, like it or not, it's good, and it's better than most cities, and it's something that is worthy of being built upon to make it even better. I think that needs to continue. I think that we need to again have some more procedural justice. There are a lot of things that citizens don't understand, that we owe it to citizens to make sure that they have access to understanding how law enforcement works. That's part of it. So I don't have the answer, but I want to speak to some of the things that we know, and some of the things that we need to continue to hack on and have dialogue on to figure out how to make sure we are improving the profession, mindful of the external environment and things that aren't unique to Omaha, but that are really just tricky aspects of law enforcement in modern times.
Just a brief historical context to the overall conversation of police community relations. It wasn't too long ago, no more than say 30, 35 years ago, that the city of Omaha and OPD had to be sued by Latinos who wanted to be police officers and wanted to have the opportunity to be promoted. that agreement, it resulted in a consent agreement back then. I knew some of the original cops that were part of that class action. And I just saw a copy recently of a consent extension on that agreement. So this is what is the history of OPD. And it's not unusual for OPD. It's not the only one that's gone through these lawsuits, but this gives you the tenor of our society, a smattering of the truth of the society, which is when a certain segment of our community has to file a lawsuit just to be given the opportunity to join the police force. And I believe the Black police officers probably also have a consent agreement. But that's what's necessary just to get onto the police force by people from our communities. So that's still in effect. Those consent agreements are in effect. I'm just giving you the context of how the struggle has continued on and on into this day. It exists. I don't have to tell any of you all. Jim Crow lives in almost every facet of society still to this day.
Paula had her hand up in a while. Paula, you want to say something?
Paula, we can't hear you. For some reason, your microphone's not working.
Can you put it in chat? I see Veronica got something up there also. Veronica, you want to say something to everyone? There's more of a point or comment.
I did put that comment there, and I have a 3-year-old who has a lot to say. So I'll just say that I was just wondering then if it is a national issue of police staffing shortages, then if people are seeing the writing on the wall that the institution is changing, how then are there creative ideas being brought forth to redeploy those budgets and those funds? Like in this case, 100 salaries aren't being distributed. So then maybe there is some redevelopment of what that budget is used for.
Wait, hold it. Maybe they should give the money back to the taxpayers. Do we need another 100 police officers?
So that's the question, right?
Does that mean
Give it to housing. Give it to housing.
Yeah, I mean, my point is, if you're doing a decent good job,
Al-Jamal, I love you, but I'm gonna say something on this one. We need the money, but we don't need the tanks or the AR-15s, or we need the community, underserved community portion of mental health, healthcare. They need to be funded. Police need to be funded, just not in the way they're doing it. They're like paramilitary. We're not the army.
By the way, Paula, did you get your mic going, Paula?
What was the question?
No, Paula was trying to say something, her mic is not working.
I'm sorry.
Paula just put it in the chat. So she says, I have some questions. Are there chapters for 360 where goals are addressed? What are there charters for 360 where goals are addressed? While the dialogue is important, how much information is fed back related to how concerns were addressed? And then I appreciate Ben's statement about complaints being addressed by an empathetic human who discusses measures they will take regarding their complaint and a timeline for resolution. Would these questions be appropriate for the 360 meeting? My answer would be yes, Paula.
Yes,
absolutely.
Right.
Like this is, I think there was a question in here or a comment about where, how do we understand or who in our community is using criminal data as a whole in the community? And from my understanding, 360 is the entity that's utilizing this information. So these types of questions, that is the intended location, the place for it.
You know, let me raise a point there. I have never seen one report from 360 that talks about disproportionate minority contact, racial disparities. I've sat in those meetings for years. I've asked for reports. I've even asked the police department, and I have not seen reports. So when we say they have the data, why are we giving it to one nonprofit and not to the rest? It's like the Omaha Public Schools. If we have data, it should be on the web page. We should all have access to it to have these conversations. Because again, if we make one entity the repository of public information, that's not fair for those of us who pay taxes. Let them pay taxes for their data then if that's the case. But I've asked for data many times from different sources, and I've never gotten any of it from any of these individuals.
You know, what it's time for is to reevaluate as a society the proper use and utilization and this is what was inferenced by Colleen, is that the police departments are we doing the right thing by our society by having this, and let's face it, it is a militarized entity in city government. That's a part of us. But is every part of that OPD system or any police department being used properly, being assigned properly? Because I remember when I first came to Omaha 35 years ago, there were two instances when I was on the scene, and I was a journalist back then, when I was on the scene of a police chase, in one instance where a man who was clearly disturbed psychologically, mentally, climbing on the top of a roof down here in South Omaha. And there was a bunch of us gathered around while the police were in the house chasing him, guns drawn. His weapon was a knife. He had a knife and he was on the roof with his head sticking out of a window. I feared for that man's life because they could not convince him to throw down the knife and climb down. He ultimately was shot and killed. But I thought that police tactics were completely wrong. Rushing the man, guns drawing, forcing him to do something crazy if he wasn't already, on the edges of that mental state of his. And I, over the years, have always proposed and promoted something called Bring Grandma to the Scene Act. And I meant that literally. Bring a family member to the scene for someone like this. Bring a friend, grandma, his mom, somebody that can talk to him, talk him down, calm him down. Don't attack the man with guns drawn, because the worst things will happen. And it happened, of course. He was shot and killed. Now, recently, the police department has added, I think in North and South precincts, people that are trained to help people who have mental issues, so that they don't automatically send the police officer, only if they do, maybe as a backup. They send this person who's trained to deal with people, like perhaps somebody like Zachary Bearhills, someone who's in that state of mind where you can possibly bring them back down, calm them down. You don't attack these people. That's the wrong tactic, because somebody will get hurt, somebody will die. And I'm glad they've made this move. But this is where we, as a community, especially with the elders and those of you who have worked social services and elsewhere, facilities, doctors, nurses, health providers, there are better ways to deal with society other than with guns and force.
Well, we're down to the last 5 minutes of the program, and I know we wanted to give ourselves a chance to say some closing comments, as well as alluding to the evaluations that are going to be out there. So we'd like to have evaluations for folks to fill that out. I think we can put it in the chat there. But we also want to follow up at some point down the road with some other agendas. So again, with 5 minutes left, we want to be very conscious of the time. Cammy, where do we go from here?
I think at this point, it's really just for you both and to kind of share any last thoughts. Where do you feel, where do we see that our steps are going? We've had some conversations, a couple ideas and suggestions have come forth about a community-centered kind of partnering oversight committee. We've had some suggestions around better data and transparency of that data is what we're calling for. And then more accessible spaces for continued dialogue. I want to thank Colleen and Keith for being here and kind of holding the fort for representing both government and law enforcement agencies. Our purpose was to have more individuals here. The invitations were made. The invitations weren't always taken. And we understand that people's times are valuable. Go ahead, Colleen. Oh, you're on mute.
We only have about 3 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure we get a chance to. Ben, did you want to say something like in a minute? And I'll say something in a minute, and then kind of close it out, because we're at the very end.
Yeah, let me just, for my own part, thank you once again, Jamal and Cammy, for putting this together and for uniting the Black and brown and white communities for this very important dialogue. And I do look forward, by the way, to other conversations along the lines of community police relationships, okay? So I'm just putting that out there. And thank you all once again for the invitation.
My closing comments is I'm really somewhat amazed and happy that we were able to pull this off. But I also say that I mailed hard copies to the county sheriff's office, the head of the FBI, to invite them, because again, to my knowledge, they have never done a community forum on a level like this, even virtual or even in person, engaging people about their structures and how they work. And so one of the things that I really somewhat have a hard time dealing with is when you have people in our community who have a certain mindset that they don't want to be accountable to the public, but yet they want our tax dollars. And so, again, we need to be very vigilant about how do we communicate to each other, how we talk to folks, and also how we engage them, because, again, our population is getting older. There's some who are coming into the system, and we got to do a much better job of doing what we're doing here tonight. I appreciate folks with what you've done and more. This is one of the first time that with Ben, me, and Cammy have come together to the Trinity, as I like to say, to bring some heavy light to these issues. But more than anything, this is just the beginning, because there's no reason on this earth that we should not have more of these real conversations and not let the repository of information be with one nonprofit or one entity, because again, we're a city, as Ben alluded to, almost 1 million when you look at this geographic area, and we should be the beacon on the hill instead of the situation where we're at now. So appreciate people being out here today. We like for folks to fill out their evaluation. And of course, as we say in many different situations like this, we want to continue and go forward and bring our worlds together, because without talking and getting into these dialogues, we're not going to be able to move to the next step to have empirical outcomes and data. And I would love to see the academic community more involved in this, in the crime commissions and all those other folks who hold information that can make our community and our state a better place. So with that, I would like to say thank you to each and every one of you. Again, as we always end in our hosted events, may the force be with you, and Barocco.